Welcome to episode 30 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on March 27th, 2020. Today we're going to talk a bit about some of the changes going on because we are all under orders to self-isolate. I have a book review for you. We are going to talk about our upcoming knit-along that I'm going to call Wind It Up. And the Shetland Wool Week hat and patron have been announced. I'll give you my thoughts on that toward the end. A few songs, a few dates, and we'll have ourselves a podcast. So everything is canceled. No trips to Wales for the foreseeable future. Local fiber events that would have happened at the same time are also canceled. I briefly thought about maybe going to Nova Scotia instead of Wales because it wouldn't involve international flights. Same idea, basically self-isolating in a different place as a solo traveler, spending my days in and my times out alone in nature. And then the border closed. So here I am. Here we all are in our little bits of the world. I hope that you all have been doing well and reaching out to people to check on them through emails and telephone and the mail, and to keep up some social interactions for the sake of your own mental health. People have been finding ways to develop a new normal that keeps them tied to others. If you are without your knitting group for the time being, I have started a weekly online knit together. So far, we have met on Thursdays as a replacement for the two knitting clubs that I usually attend on Thursdays, but both of those clubs are now moving online, so I'm going to be moving our online knit together to Tuesday evenings from 3 to 8 p.m. Eastern. The link for the knit together will be in the show notes and also in the I Thought I Knew How podcast Facebook group as a pinned post at the top of the page, so look there. Once I've logged in at 3 p.m., then the meeting will open and others can join in. We do not talk politics or about the virus. Not talking about the virus is getting harder, to be honest, just because it's affecting us all so much at this point. But we do try our best to keep virus talk limited to lifestyle issues rather than speculations about the whens and hows of the virus itself. It has been really nice to be able to put faces and personalities to names and to start to get to know you all. I'm glad we've had so many be able to join in. Please don't be shy about coming. It really is nice to connect. In our second get-together, I asked people for book recommendations, and I think it was Duke who mentioned a book called The Manly Art of Knitting, or maybe we just saw a link to it when we were looking at another book. I don't quite remember now, but I found a copy of it on Amazon and I ordered it because I have my nephew who started knitting about a year ago as part of his plan to learn all the life skills he can. The book arrived the other day and I'm kind of in love with it and I don't want to pass it on to him, but I will, I promise. I think I've got the right yarn for a couple of the projects and I'm thinking I'll make a little box to send to him with the book. The book was originally published in 1972 and was out of print for a long time and was reprinted in 2014. And I think we have the hipsters to thank for that. When I ordered it, I thought that it was a new book made to look old. The cover is black and white and has a photo of a cowboy knitting while sitting on the back of his horse. If I had said to a 25-year-old in 2014 that I need a cover of a knitting book for men, I feel like this is one of the options he would have come back with as a retro throwback to an early age where men were men. But when you start to read the book, you realize that there is nothing tongue-in-cheek about this book. It may have been republished as a novelty item, but the book itself in 1972 was written by a male knitter to appeal to manly men to take up knitting. The writing is direct and to the point. It reminds me of business books from that era. It doesn't mince words. It conveys the information needed with little to no hand-holding. The introductory chapter, which makes the case that historically knitting was done by men, takes up half a page. The book then goes right into direct explanations of casting on, knitting, purling, increasing, decreasing, binding off, blocking, and assembly. After that, there is a stitch dictionary with 7 different stitch patterns. Then you have 6 patterns for a dog blanket, a ribbed cap, a wall hanging, a horse blanket, a small vest, and a hammock. The directions for these patterns are, again, very clear and direct. The horse blanket, for instance, says to go find an old length of hose that's gone bad, cut it to a certain length, sharpen the ends, and use that as your circular needle. You then knit a tube with bulky yarn, sew up the ends when you're done, and you have a saddle pad. The hammock is knit using rope and shovel handles. The other patterns use real yarn and needles, but I love these two projects because they tap into that stereotypically manly, use what you have to make what you need impulse that I see in my dad's generation, which is the generation that this book was originally written for. He would have been about 29 at the time it was published. The last chapter talks about fixing things like split yarn or dropped stitches. There are still copies of this on Amazon. I got a used hardcover copy and it is in perfect condition. Many of the copies are less than $10. If you have a man in your life who is interested in learning to knit, I think this is actually a solid starting place. The information is clear and the projects are useful and not that far off from the typical beginner projects you'd see in other books. The book has some negative reviews on Amazon, but that mostly seems to be from people who think that the book was written as a joke and that it isn't funny. But it's not a joke book. It's a legitimate how-to book from another era. And honestly, the directness and the usability of the projects makes it feel like a very stress-free, no-pressure way to start knitting. There aren't any assurances that if you just try, you'll be okay. It just treats you like a human being who's capable of following directions. As I said, I kind of love this book. Once again, it's The Manly Art of Knitting by Dave Fougner, Fougner. Find the link in the show notes and order it for the man in your life who wants to give knitting a go. Or for yourself. Seriously. Both of our songs for today are going to be from the same artist. This is jazz duo Kennedy E. Morrison and Stephen Rice performing Very Exceptionary.
You're very exceptionary. No dictionary can define what's genuinely indescribable. Very exceptionary. No ordinary phrase can capture you. Now some might say that you're tremendous. You are so much more stupendous, so magnificent, so magnanimous. If we voted, it'd be unanimous. Very exceptionary. This temporary phrase will have to do. It's true. For my very exceptionary you. Stupendous, so magnificent, so magnanimous. If we voted, it'd be unanimous.
let's talk about our new knit along. I think that for most of us, it's going to be the perfect knit along for our present circumstances. We are going to take on our unfinished projects and spend 30 days addressing them one way or the other. I typically do this myself every year in January, and this was going to be our January knit along for the group. But we ended up having the Harriet's Hat knit along with Jana Knits instead, which was super great. But I am behind in taking care of my unfinished items. But I am behind now in taking care of my unfinished projects. And those of you who watch Jana's podcast have just done an unfinished object knit along, so you may be sick of dealing with them, and that's okay. We will be doing knit alongs quarterly in our group, so just hold tight, and there should be another one that you can join in on in July, I believe. This knit along is going to be called Wind It Up because the goal is either to get through as many of our unfinished projects as possible and either wind them up by finishing them or wind them up by pulling them out and returning the yarn to stash. I promised in our last knit along that the next one would take place on Facebook, so that's where we will be for this. Join the I Thought I Knew How podcast group there for all the discussion and encouragement as we make our way through this knit along. What I would like you to do is go through your stash and crafting spaces and pull out every one of your unfinished projects and get them all together in one place. If you did the rerun of the Yarn Stash D-Stash over the last couple of weeks, you should know exactly where all of those are already. If not, you can still find all of the posts for the D-Stash in the Facebook group or on my Instagram account, which is at I Thought I Knew How. And if you don't want to do them, just go digging and see what unfinished projects you can find. Once you have them all together, take a picture. Just one. You don't have to get them out of their bags and artfully arrange them. Just get a snapshot of the starting point. There will be a post about the knit along stuck to the top of the group feed on Facebook. Reply to that post with a picture of your unfinished projects. You can tell us what they are, how long you've been working on them, stuff like that, but you don't have to. Please just post one picture with all of your projects in them though. As you finish a project in the course of the month, you can post it to the group or to that thread to let us know you're done. Either way, I will see it. If you stopped working on the project because you had an issue with the technique, ask for help in the group. If you end up pulling the project apart and returning it to stash, let us know and post a picture. If you are so completely over the project but think that someone might enjoy it and you'd like to offer it as a gift to a fellow listener, feel free to post it to the group. While I'll allow people to ask for a reimbursement for shipping in a case like that, please do not try to sell any projects or yarns in the group. You can hop over to Ravelry and do that there using their stash selling function. So go to the group and post a picture of all your unfinished projects in the thread about the knit along tacked to the top of the feed. Post your progress, ask for help, or offer unfinished items others might like in the group over the course of the month. And post photos of either finished projects or yarn you're sending back to stash to the group. The thread will go up on April 1st. And on May 1st, 2020, I'll randomly pick winners from my list of people who posted their starting photo in the knit along thread and posted at least one finished or unraveled and returned to stash photo to the knit along thread or the group as a whole. So one more time, just to be clear. Step 1, post a photo of all your unfinished projects to the knit along post tacked to the top of the group page. Step 2, finish at least one project or take a project apart and return the yarn to stash. Step 3, post a photo of the finished project or reclaimed yarn either to the knit along post or the main group feed. Do those 3 things and you're entered in the drawing. I don't want to come up with a bunch of prizes tied to requirements beyond that because one person's super stressful project is someone else's no big deal. And some people have tons of time to finish knitting the lace shawl they started, and someone else just has time for finishing the ribbing on a hat. The accomplishment we're looking for to celebrate here is getting our unfinished items dealt with either by finishing them or returning the yarn to stash. Really, everyone's a winner, right? Because you either have a project finished in 30 days or you'll have a bunch of yarn returned to your stash that you can find new uses for. But we also have a few sponsors who are offering prizes. First, I'll be offering 3 sets of stitch markers to 3 different winners. Merrily by Design has 2 coupon codes for people to pick a pattern free from her Ravelry store. She is building a catalog of Fair Isle patterns that just continues to get more and more lovely as she goes. Her Sea Pinks cuffs are so pretty and would be a perfect portable project as the heat rises with the arrival of spring. And then the finished cuffs would be really easy to keep in a bag pocket when we're finally able to move about freely again and you find yourself dressed for summer, but then you're somewhere where they are trying to recreate the Arctic tundra with their air conditioning. Just pull them out and put them on. Prairie Bag Works is offering a $35 gift certificate along with free shipping to their Etsy shop. They produce lovely project bags and will even work with customers to try to find the right fabric you're looking for. I'm still a big fan of their cotton yarn bowl that is nicely bendy so it travels well with me to knit clubs and trains and such and keeps my yarn from rolling all over. Ashcroft Makers will also be donating a bag as a prize. Finn doesn't just dye yarn. She also makes lovely project bags. Hop over to Ashcroft Makers to check them out. While I have your ear about Ashcroft Makers, if you've been thinking about purchasing some of her sock yarn, you may want to head over as some of her colors have recently sold out. Use the link in the show notes to get there and you'll be helping to support the show. And patrons, remember to hop over to the Patreon group for the 10% off coupon code. Knitter's Pride is offering 5 prizes. First, there are 2 row counter ring prizes. One is a size 11 and one is a size 12. You are meant to wear them on your thumb or first finger, so you typically need to buy a size a few steps up from what you wear on your ring finger. So if that sounds super big, that would actually be a comfortable fit for a lot of people. They're also offering a gift package made up of their Smart Sticks fixed 24-inch circular needles in US sizes 13, 15, and 17. So all 3 are one prize. There is a prize package of US size 7 and 8 Smart Sticks interchangeable needle tips with a 60-inch and a 30-inch cord. And there's another gift package of the same tips with a size 60-inch and 24-inch cord. I like the Smart Sticks. They are the needle type I reviewed a few months ago that have bands of color around them in 1-inch chunks, as well as dots on the cords placed every 1 inch. It makes it so easy to measure your knitting as you go when you can just pull one side of your circular needle out long and use it as a ruler. Finally, Kraemer Yarns is offering 5 skeins in the color of the winner's choosing in Perfection Sport. This is the yarn I just reviewed recently that I used to make the baby sweater with fish around the waist. The yarn is perfect for a machine washable sweater or baby gift or afghan, and with 2,000 yards of it in the 5 skeins, you should have plenty to work with. Many, many thanks to Ashcroft Makers, Kraemer Yarns, Knitter's Pride, Merrily by Design, and Prairie Bag Works for sponsoring the Wind It Up Knit Along. If you would like to sponsor a gift to a participant, please let me know as soon as possible at ann@familypodcasts.com. I am more than happy to add to the list and share your business with people as a thank you. In the coming weeks, as you need something, please keep your local yarn shop in mind. All of the ones in our area are doing call-ahead ordering with delivery to your car. I've seen many offering free shipping with low minimum purchases. Amazon and the big box stores are likely to survive the economic situation resulting from the self-isolation orders. Many small businesses likely will not. The government is offering loans to small businesses, but when things start up again, that just means that small businesses will have their normal expenses and a loan payment to make. As much as you can, support the community shops you've come to rely on. If your local yarn store has completely shut down, please consider purchasing from mine. Rachel at U&U Fiber Arts for Life has put her inventory online. You can find her shop at tinyurl.com/u&u. That's tinyurl.com/EWE and YOU. I will link to the shop in the show notes too. If you find yourself missing a yarn festival that's been canceled or needing a knitting-related gift for someone else or yourself, I won't judge, or want to find some lovely hand-dyed yarn or farm yarns, keep in mind that almost every one of the canceled festivals still has their vendor list on their website. Hop over, click through to one of the vendors who has now lost the revenue from that show, and see if you can find something from one of them to meet your needs. I'm not an advocate for spending for the sake of spending, but do keep the little guys in mind as much as you can when you have to make a purchase over the coming weeks. Okay, first, I'm going to share my list of unfinished projects so you know that you are not in this alone. And then I'm going to share some ideas to help us all decide how to proceed. I currently have 3 active projects on the needles right now. I'm hoping by the time this releases that they will all be done. The one I think might still be on my needles by April 1st is the stitch sampler shawl that I'm knitting using the grab bag yarn I got at Webb's. So that might be part of the photo I post on April 1st. The rest of my projects, however, qualify as being untouched for quite an age. There are 10 of them. I think I'll just go from oldest to newest. So my oldest project is the Fetlar Scarf by Marie Wallen, published in the Shetland Wool Week Annual from 2017. I started it while I was in Shetland the first time in July 2018. This is the very first Fair Isle project that I ever cast on. This scarf is the reason why I always say that Harriet's hat is the first Fair Isle project I ever finished. It's a fairly wide scarf, so I cast on fewer stitches to make it narrower and longer, but I calculated the number of stitches I needed improperly, and because I was so new to Fair Isle, my tension was all over the place. So I actually have frogged this project and started it again according to the pattern directions, but my tension was still not ideal, and I have learned a lot since I tried this, so I think I'm actually going to rip it out again and start it over. I'm not sure if I will cast it on again this month. It may just get ripped back and stored with my collection of projects that I'm waiting to knit. My next oldest is the Iron Maiden shawl. This is the shawl that I knit entirely, bound off, and realized that my gauge was so much tighter than the designer's, who hadn't included her gauge in the pattern, that the wingspan was a good foot too short. As a tall person, a too short shawl just does not work on me, so I frogged it all back and started again. I really want to finish the shawl because I'm knitting it in a gorgeous red raw silk, and it will be perfect as a summer shawl. Then I have the Burberry inspired cowl that I started last summer and got about 8 inches into. It's knit horizontally with the ends grafted together. So I'm probably a third of the way there, and it's a pretty mindless knit. I think this one will come off the needles during the knit along as a finished project. At this point in my unfinished projects timeline, I went away to Shetland and the Highlands and came back with 4 projects that I started in classes and have not yet finished. There's the mini lace hat, the arm warmers from the KnitSonik workshop, 1 finished cuff from the How to Knit a Shetland Cuff workshop that needs a mitten knit on top of it, and then a whole other matching mitten made for it, and a partially knit Gansey bag from my Gansey workshop at Loch Ness Knit Fest. Additionally, I have a machine knit sweater body that I got while I was in Shetland that needs the cuffs and bottom ribbing attached, the yoke knit, and the button band done. And finally, I have the Chatham, which is a wide scarf of color blocks knit on the bias using intarsia that I gave up on because I had to focus on Christmas knitting. All told, 10 projects. You may have more, you may have fewer. That's okay. I'm thinking now I'm going to frog 1 and try to finish 5 this month. That might be a stretch. We'll see. So let's talk about how we're going to get through all these unfinished projects of ours. I find they get abandoned for different reasons, and people get overwhelmed by things for different reasons. So I have a list of ways to think about your unfinished projects and ways to tackle them, and hopefully something will strike a chord with you and help you get beyond whatever it was that made you set the project aside and move on to something else. So 1, the first issue that often comes up is time. Looking at my pile of projects, that is really what was at fault with most of them. Other projects came up that needed to be done, so the first project was abandoned and never picked up on again. If time is your issue, a lot of us have extra time on our hands now. But you know what? Some of us are pretty busy with all the changes. Some of us have kids at home now that we're having to care for during the day that we didn't before. Whatever your situation, though, just set aside some time every day to knit a little bit. Another reason things get abandoned is lack of knowledge. That's really what happened for me with the Chatham scarf. Yeah, I had Christmas knitting to do, but the real reason that made me abandon the project was because I wasn't catching on to intarsia and garter stitch. And I didn't have time to get comfortable with the technique and get other things knit. So it had to wait, and I knit a different gift for the original recipient. If lack of knowledge is an issue for you with a project, I would say head over to YouTube and make yourself a course. There are so many people producing videos on how to do different techniques that just searching for it on YouTube is going to turn up the information that you need. And if you need to watch 3 or 4 different people explain it to you, that's okay. They're all right there. The other reason I think that we abandon projects is that we just don't love them anymore. Maybe our color preferences shift, or we try it on as we're working on it and we don't love how the fit is turning out. Maybe some new and shiny project caught our eye and we just wanted to work on that more than we wanted to continue with our current project. So what do we do? Well, there's one way to think about our knitting that actually will change all of these issues in one fell swoop. The other night, I was watching the ladies from Dixon Knitting in their class on Knit Stars that was offered free last week. Sadly, by the time this airs, it won't be free, but you can find it for a fee if you like, I'm sure, and I'll see if I can stick a link in the show notes. Anyway, Anne Shane was saying that she liked to think of her unfinished items as knitting layaway. It's stuff that can wait and be picked up later. At that point, some of it can be quickly finished and give her that boost of finishing a project, which can feel really good when you're slogging away at another bigger project. Some of it she wasn't ready to knit at the time, but now she is. But it's all there waiting for her to find joy in at a later date. For those of you who are young enough that you haven't encountered layaway, it was a way that retailers allowed you to make payments on something weekly or monthly, and the store would hold on to the item you were buying until you'd paid it off completely. There was usually a small fee involved. It lasted well into the age of credit cards, but I think pretty much every store has stopped offering layaway at this point. I could be wrong, though. Anyway, I remember my mom putting things on layaway now and then when we were kids and being really excited about some of the things and knowing that eventually we'd get that, toaster or television or whatever to use at our home. So the first thing I'd like us all to do is abandon the negative terms we use when we talk about our knitting layaway. Let's not feel guilty or embarrassed or overwhelmed. Layaway was anticipatory and exciting. Let's look at our knitting layaway the same way and take some time in April to treat ourselves by paying off the balance on some of our knitting layaway items so we can put them into use. The first step, really, in working through our layaway is to decide if we need to make some returns. Take a look at the projects that you have. Is there anything you know you do not want to finish knitting? Go ahead and deal with it now. Unravel the projects, wind up the yarn as you go so you don't have to deal with tangles, and return it to stash. Once that decision is made and you're just left with the things you want to free from layaway, here's some methods you might want to employ. The first one I call the Dave Ramsey method. So many of you probably know Dave Ramsey is a financial advisor, and one of the more controversial ways he has of having people deal with their debt is to have them pay off the smallest debt first, no matter how much interest it's collecting. His reasoning is that everyone gets a buzz from paying off a debt, and when you feel happy about paying off one debt, you're more likely to want to pay off the next one. So for us, we're going to get the buzz from finishing a project. So look for the project that needs the least amount of work and do that first, and then ride that success wave into the next project. Or you could do the opposite. You could take on your projects from the most time demanding to the least. Honestly, my brain does not work that way. So I can't really understand why someone would want to do the biggest project first, but maybe I guess it's gratifying to you to work on one project consistently for a while, or to get that big thing out of the way. So if that sounds appealing to you, you could order it that way. You could also take them in order of the amount of size they take up. So I have this thing about wanting my projects to fit into the space I have available to store them. So when I tackle my unfinished projects, I tend to work on the bulkiest items first. Not necessarily the ones that use the bulkiest yarns, but the ones that take up the most space in my storage. You might take an eat your veggies first approach and start with the project that you like the least and get it out of your way, and then work your way up to your favorite projects. Or you might be a dessert first kind of person and want to work them the other way around from your most favorite to your least favorite. If the project went into layaway because you didn't have the skills you need yet, you could start with those. And like I said, turn to YouTube, post something to the group, asking for help. And rather than blaming your lack of knowledge for the fact that you didn't finish it, look at it as a chance to expand your knitting toolkit. If you have kids at home doing distance learning at the moment, this can be your distance learning activity. Finally, there's a way I learned about from Jana Knits that she learned about from the people at Wool and Honey, who in turn got it from one of their customers, Lynn Gideon, who got it from a needlepoint group she used to be a part of. So clearly this method has gotten around, but I hadn't heard about it until Jana told me about it. If you are struggling to know which of your layaway projects you want to return to stash and which ones you want to finish, this is a good method for you to try. Or if you're the kind of person who really doesn't like to work on something continuously, this could also be good for you. It's going around the internet now as the Gideon method, named after the Wool and Honey customer who told them about it. I will link to the actual blog post where they described it, but basically, you take a handful of your knitting layaway projects and put them in whichever order you want. Then you take the first, you work on it for 12 hours of knitting time or until you're completely done with it, whichever comes first. If you're done, great. You move on to the next project and work on it for 12 hours or until it's done. If you're not done after 12 hours, that project moves to the back of the pack and you move on to the second project. You keep working through your projects like that, putting 12 hours at a time on a project, whether that takes you a week to get through the 12 hours or a day or all month. And once that 12 hours is up or the project is done, you move on to the next one. It can keep things fresh for you, which can be very helpful for some people. If you are working on a project that you want to finish but is difficult, you know you have to work on it only for 12 hours and then you can move on to something else. You can use the timer on your phone or a piece of scratch paper in your knitting bag to keep track of the time you've worked on a project, or just keep a running tally in your mind. That's fine too. The other thing about this method is if you get to one of your projects and decide you really don't want to put in 12 hours of work into it, that's a very good indication that you should return that yarn to stash and move on to something else. Now, I know that some of you are thinking that the Gideon method sounds like too much tracking. And I totally get that, but you can find ways to make it work for you. So for instance, you can adjust the number of hours. Maybe you want to put in 4 hours of knitting time before you rotate instead of 12. Maybe you don't want to be concerned about tracking the time at all. In that case, you could switch projects every day. So if you have 4 hours to knit on Monday, great. The Monday project gets 4 hours of work and then goes to the back of the line. And then on Tuesday, if you only had 20 minutes of knitting time, that's fine. The Tuesday project gets those 20 minutes and then goes to the back of the line. I think the important thing with this method is that you decide what rules you're going to follow for your rotation and you stick to those rules as you go. This method would not work for me for most of my knitting layaway, so don't feel badly if you decide it won't work for you. Because so many of my knitting layaway projects are currently things left over from classes, I think it will be better if I put my full attention into each of them one at a time to focus on the techniques involved. But if I get them all done and am left with just regular projects, I may switch to the Gideon method. And because I know I'm distractible enough that my time tracking would not be anywhere near accurate, I think I would rotate through each project every day or maybe every 2 days. So think about how you want to tackle these projects. And if you'd like, share them in the thread on the Facebook group when you post your before picture. Let's have another interlude with Stephen Rice and Kennedy Morrison. This is I Can't Help But Wonder.
I can't help but wonder if I'm under a spell. It's more than a passing notion. I've never fallen with such devotion. I can't help but wonder if it's only a dream. Am I naive or can I believe that things are really as they seem? Can anyone explain it? How to understand what's true? I know I just can't tame it. Whenever I'm with you, I can't help but wonder if you wonder about me. 'Cause lately I can't help but wonder how wonderful this might be. Can anyone explain it? How to understand what's true? I know I just can't take it. Whenever I'm with you, but wonder if you wonder about me. 'Cause lately I can't help but wonder how wonderful this might be. 'Cause lately I can't help but wonder how wonderful this might be.
A few more things before I go. A lot of designers have been offering free patterns while social isolation has been going on. As many as I see, I've been reposting to the Facebook group unless the designer specifically asked for it not to be reposted. Some of the offers have already expired, but if you'd like to have an easy spot to check for those free patterns, go join the I Thought I Knew How podcast group on Facebook. You are welcome to also put any free patterns you find there. Honestly, I have no idea if I will ever knit through all the free patterns that I have saved to my Ravelry library now, but it's been a great way to find some new to me designers, and I've been enjoying all these offers for that reason alone. One new pattern that just came out on the day I'm recording is the new Shetland Wool Week hat designed by this year's patron, Wilma Malcolmson. I did not have the pleasure of meeting Wilma on either of my trips to Shetland, but I will tell you this. I had a handful of people ask me who I thought this year's patron would be, and every time I answered Wilma Malcolmson. Every class I was in, her name was mentioned. People kept asking if I'd been to her studio yet. Those who had a class with her would talk my ear off about how wonderful she is with color. And she really is. I have the yarn for her Vermeer cushion in my stash from my first trip to Shetland. And now I have yarn on my way to knit the Shetland Wool Week hat from 2 different yarn manufacturers. And I'm hoping to get a third because they really are lovely. When the pattern was released today, I fell in love with it. It is a return to traditional Shetland motifs that we haven't seen in the Shetland Wool Week hat since the Schwook hat that Hazel Tyndall designed in 2014. Don't get me wrong, I love every one of the Shetland Wool Week hats, but the only one so far that has been a traditional Fair Isle design was the first. Wilma said in an interview with Shetland Wool Week that her design, called Katie's Kep, was inspired by her mother. She said, "Like many girls of my generation, I was taught to knit by my mother, Katie. She was an amazing woman who was resourceful, patient, and always ready with some wise words to make a tricky situation easier. I thought I could use 2 of her favorite patterns to create a traditional kep as a tribute to her and all the other knitters who were so willing to help us learn." I love that. Yes, there is a lot of innovation going into Shetland knitting these days, but I really appreciate that Wilma chose to use her time as patron to highlight traditional patterns to honor the traditional ways that knitting knowledge has been passed down from parent to child. It's especially fitting, I think, as the Shetland Prairie Makers work to preserve the local knitting methods by teaching them to the children during their lunch breaks at schools. The Shetland Wool Week social media accounts have been teasing the colors from the different yarn manufacturers all week, and I fell in love with the colors for the Uradale yarn, so I went ahead and ordered those before I even saw the pattern. The others I held off on. Now that I've seen the pattern, I've decided to knit one using Jamieson and Smith that I already had in stash. The shades are green, purple, brown, and one that incorporates all of those shades. But I had to order the main color, so I've picked a white and an oatmeal, and when they arrive, I'll decide which one to use. Also, now, having seen the pattern, I am totally smitten with the colors of the hat from Shetland Handspun. They are all autumnal shades with an oatmeal-y background. The problem is that I'm worried that the yarn might be in limited supply. To buy the yarn, you have to email Elizabeth Johnston directly. But in her post, she didn't put the price or the email address. So I had to do some detective work to find her email, and I'm waiting to hear back now. If I don't get to order the yarn, I will live, but I'm hopeful. I do have plans for one more, but I'll wait and see if I have the time to make it before I share. Finally, we are still going to have some knitting trivia coming up, but it's going to be shifted to the Morehouse Open Farm Day scheduled for June 6th. Same deal. For a $5 donation to the Shetland MRI Scanner Appeal, you can enter the knitting trivia contest to possibly win a gift certificate to Morehouse Farm. I've also been invited to go to Knit New Haven on June 13th. For Worldwide Knit in Public Day, where I will have a little information table about the MRI Makers and the Shetland MRI Scanner Appeal. So come say hi there. If you've been by Knit New Haven, you know they have yarn bombed the area outside of their shop, and that all gets updated on Worldwide Knit in Public Day. So come do your bit for that. More information on all of that will come in time. Thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you'd like to support the show, visit patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow to make a monthly pledge, or consider making a purchase from one of our sponsors on the website, IThoughtIKnewHow.familypodcasts.com, where you can also find the show notes for each episode. Or you can help out by leaving a 5-star review and kind comments wherever you listen to the podcast. And tell your friends. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on Facebook and Ravelry are both called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time